presenting it, right?
Hi, hello everyone. Very good evening. Welcome to the webinar. Thank you, Safwan. So today we're going to be looking at, by the way, I'm Sandra, the facilitator for the session today. So we're going to be looking at one of the most popular tool in Excel. Whenever you need to deal with a large amount of data set, whether it's client data, let's say customer list, sales data, expenses. We always need to make sense out of these data. Could be routine reporting that we have to do. We want to detect trends in our data, all right, and so on. So pivot table and Power Query is the two tools that are quite essential for this. Now, trying to learn pivot table and Power Query in 1.5 hours is a tall order, but you will, I believe you'll have enough takeaway from the session today to see how these two tools can help you manage your data sets. Right? So if you have any question throughout our session, please share your questions in the chat area. I'll try to answer them as we go, or we will keep them towards the end of our session. Right, so we'll just run through a very quick intro, and then we'll be looking at how do you set up your pivot table in Excel. And then we'll look at this Power Query tool, which can help you in cleaning up your data, followed by a Q&A session. So first of all, why do we use pivot table? There are many benefits to it, both pivot table and Power Query. But the most commonly one, for example, its main tool is to summarize your data set. If you have thousands of record, you want to do quick summary, you want to summarize by time period, summarize by different categories, and so on without writing formula. So it's very efficient in that way. And it's very flexible to use because it just use a technique of dragging and dropping. So we don't really have to think about, do I have to structure my formulas? Do I have to create a data set and so on, right? And there is a lot of automation included when it comes to cleaning up your data. How do you deal with duplicate data? How do you deal with blanks? I have date that Excel doesn't recognize as date. So all these can be automated. We don't have to manually go through them now. And in the end, with all these summaries that you create, you turn your data into meaningful insights, right? Whether to present to management or for you to analyze your own data itself, right? So some example, like I said earlier, if I have a sales data, I need to look at the trend, which product is most popular, which region is doing well, who are the top salesperson, or let's say if I have expenses, I need to group in a financial environment, group my expenses based on the different categories, any very high amount or very low amount anomalies, and things that stand out. I want to detect. How do we go about doing it? And of course, the cleaning of the data. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I want to deal with duplicates. Or let's say my data are all in one column. I need to separate them into different columns. Make sure the format of the column is recognized in Excel, right? So these are some examples of what we can do in Power Query and pivot table. Okay. So under the pivot table part, we're going to look at three main components. First of all, how do you structure your pivot table? From raw data, you come up with your report. And then how do you do grouping, all right? Group relevant columns together. How do you view specific data by using filtering techniques in pivot table? And how do you include calculation? Sometimes your data may not provide you enough information, so you may need to create new fields. Followed by, we look at the concept of dynamic dashboard. Dashboard basically is an interactive report now. So if I want to be able to view by year, perhaps I can have like a slider showing the years, or I want to view, let's say, by different categories. I can have buttons that I can click on rather than searching for this data. Okay. So the steps to set up your pivot table, okay, when you start with your data, you will have to work with a clean data. At the later part of our session, we'll look at how can we achieve the clean data. Many people will struggle getting their reports is because the source data is not properly set up now, okay? So in a pivot table, you have three main areas that you work with: rows and column, that is for grouping of your data, whether I want to group by month, group by category, let's say group by gender, all this is done under rows and column. All the summary calculation will go into values, right? And you can use a ready-made style for you to do formatting. So you don't have to do formatting from scratch. Okay, let me show you a sample data set. For those who have just joined in, all the slides and this data set, a link will be provided towards the end of session. So you can try out what we are doing in our session. Okay, so this data set over here is a very simple data set. It kind of shows the sales data for a sporting goods company. You have the salesperson name, date and sales amount, the product, the region, the year, who's the purchaser, and the profit. So you can see everything is properly labeled. Every column has a unique label, right? There are no blank rows in between, right? No blank columns in between. So this is simple setup for a clean data set. Now let's say I want to do a pivot table to compare the performance of, let's say, each salesperson over the 2 years. So I want to know, did they improve the sales, or did the sales go down, is it stagnant, and so on. So whenever you want to start off with a pivot table, simply select any cell within your data, not necessary to highlight. From the Insert tab, you can choose the command pivot table. So they will automatically select our range because there are no blank rows or column in between, right? And then they will prompt you where you want to place your data. We will typically try to put it on a new worksheet so you don't interrupt your data set. But if you want, you can always put it in the same area. So I'm just going to choose existing worksheet. And let's say I put it somewhere on the right over here. So we will get pivot table build area followed by a fields panel on the right. You can see from the fields panel, it shows all the field names. The first row is automatically recognized as the heading. And there are 4 areas in a pivot table. I mentioned earlier that columns and rows are for you to do grouping. So whether you want to group horizontally or vertically. Values is for your summary calculation. Filter, we'll look at it shortly. Yeah? Okay, coming back to what I mentioned earlier, I want to see the performance of every salesperson. So I need the salesperson name. Let's say I drag and drop into columns. So this will give you a horizontal layout of all the sales rep. Okay. If you wanted a vertical approach, simply drag the sales rep into rows. This is what we mean by drag and drop now, right? Simply change the placement of the field from row to column to change the layout. And normally the labels are automatically sorted in ascending order by default. Okay? So now I have all my sales reps. I want to break them down according to the year. So I'm going to drag year and drop it to columns. As simple as that. Okay? So once you have the appropriate field, I want to know their sale. We drag the field sale and drop to values. Any numeric data that we put into values, the pivot table will automatically do a summation for us. See how from your raw data, right, in rows and columns like this, you can convert it to a summarized pivot table. What if I change my mind, or when whoever requested this says that instead of salesperson, we want to see the performance of a product? You simply go to the field sales rep and drag the field out, right, out of the panel. Otherwise, you can also click the drop down and choose remove field. and put in a different field inside. That's how fast you can change the summary. Right? Just drag and drop accordingly. Okay. So simple part on setting up a pivot table. Okay. Now let's say while I'm looking at this, maybe I decide that I want to look at one of my salesperson's data. For example, John. Uh, because our data is not really that large, I can see that his sales is one of the highest for 2025. So I would like to extract all his records and maybe look through them now. To extract records from pivot table is as simple as a matter of double clicking. I simply go to the value, right? To just double click on this value and Excel will extract all the underlying record for that value. So John actually has two sales entries. Okay? You see, it is being added to a new worksheet. Okay, let me come back to the sales worksheet. Or what if, let's say, I'm doing some audit trail checking and so on. I need to get all the records for the year 2024. You notice my pivot table automatically comes with the grand total. So this figure represents the total for 2024. If I double click on it, it will extract all the underlying record. Right? So that's the basic part on setting up a pivot table. And one tip for you, when you want to extract records for a particular value, simply double click on the value. Okay. Now let's talk about the formatting. Once the basic pivot table is set up, you want to do some quick formatting. All you have to do, select any part of the pivot table. On the Design tab, we have some built-in styles. Okay. This is if you're rushing for time, you just want something quicker, you can make use of this style. The three color schemes, we have light, medium, and dark. So you can just mouse over and select whichever works for you. Of course, there will be some of us may have our own formatting style, right? Or maybe in an organization they have a particular style that they follow. You can always use your regular formatting icon to do your formatting. Other than that, in terms of colors, border, can make use of the pivot table styles. Okay. All right. Now let's look at another example. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at how do you do three particular tasks in pivot table in terms of grouping, right? Sometimes, for example, if you look at this illustration over here, I have data that is on a daily basis, and you can see that it has been grouped on quarter or month, right? And how do you do filtering? I want to view specific records only. And how do you add custom metrics, calculation based on your existing data? Okay. Now, if you look at this data set, this is a small sample data from a departmental store. We have transaction for about 3 months. The data shows the date of transaction, transaction ID, department, payment type. These are all so-called card transaction. So the payment type indicate the type of card used. Issuer, the bank that issued the card, followed by amount charged by the card. Okay, let's say for example, I want to show total amount, all right, and the number of transaction for each month. Okay? We have data from August all the way to November. Right. So again, we select any cell within our data set. Under insert, we choose pivot table. Choose a location where you would like to put the pivot table. Highly recommend to put in a new worksheet. Okay, so first decide how are you going to group your data. I wanted to know by every month, so I have to use the date field. So when I drag the date field and drop it to rows, you will see that Excel automatically groups them by month. So when they have individual date, and because my data all happen to be within the year 2024, they are grouping by month. If I have multi-year data, they will group by year. So this is auto now. If you want to see how it happened, you can always right click any one of the month name and choose ungroup. So if somebody wanted a daily report, they'll go for this one. Otherwise, when you right click the date and you choose group, you can select any of this grouping level. Let's say if I choose quarters, I have data from quarter 3 and quarter 4. Right? So date values are grouped automatically, but you can change by using your right-click method. Okay, ungroup if you want to see individual date, or group to choose a particular grouping level. Okay, so I have my month. I wanted to see total amount. So I'm going to drag amount into values. Again, if you recall, I mentioned earlier, if it's a numerical value, it's automatically summed by default. Right? And then we also wanted to see how we number of transaction. So let's say I decide to use the transaction IDs. I'm going to drop that into values. So what happens over here? The transaction ID numerical value. So you can see that they're actually adding up the numbers, which doesn't make sense over here. So all the calculation that you drop the value, you can change the summary function. It's just a matter of right-clicking on any one of the value, go to summarize values file. So the major statistical functions are here now, right? So if I switch to count, I will be doing counting. Let's say instead of sum of amount, we will look at average amount. Simply right-click one of the values, right? Summarize values by, and you can toggle between these functions. Right? Very that fast. All right. KPI measure function is normally done in Power Pivot. There's another branch of beyond this. So we don't really do that in this particular session, right? Okay. Let's say I'm going to show you another type of grouping. This is grouping of date values. Let's say I'm analyzing the amount that are being charged to the card. Let's say all these amount, maybe I want to group them by every $25, for example. And then for each $25, I want to know how many transactions are there. This is something like frequency analysis. Right. So I'm gonna select any cell in my data set, insert another pivot table. You can have multiple pivot table based on your data set. Right. I'm just gonna put it at the right here. Okay. So what am I grouping now? I want to group all the amounts. So I'm going to drag that and drop it into rows. So numeric value, they will just list down accordingly. Right? You right click one of the values and choose group. Okay. You see the grouping is different. Previously, we were grouping under the month, right? You have all the month, year values, but for numbers, you get simply start, right, and end, and by what. So let's say I would like to start from 0. Okay, the ending, I leave it as 200, and I want to group by every 25. The band is up to you now, right? There. Sometimes people who do based on age, they might use this, right? So I have all the various amount. I wanted to know how many transactions. So I'm going to drop the transaction into values and change the calculation to count. So from here, we can say that amounts between 100 to 124 has the high, amount between 50 to 74 has the highest frequency. Is the amount charged most on the card payments. Okay. You can always use conditional formatting to highlight this data. Under Home tab, you have this feature, conditional formatting, which can help you highlight top bottom values. Okay. So if I want to look at the highest value, lowest value, you can make use of them. Right? All right. Now, the other feature that we're going to look at is the feature called filter. So far in the pivot table, we look at the rows column, grouping of record, values is summary calculation. So if I want to add filter features, this is one area where you can use that now. Let's say I would like to filter my monthly report here according to the various departments. So I'm going to drop department into filters. You notice you will get one more header at the top and a filter drop down. So if I wanted to concentrate on linens, for example, so the table automatically filters. We can have multiple fields as our filter, right? If you want to be able to choose more than one option, you can turn on the select multiple items option, right? I want to be able to filter by department and also the, let's say the payment type. So I can add more fields into filters. For example, I want to look at appliances and Visa payments only. Right. So as you make your selection, the table gets filtered accordingly. The filter has also one special feature. Let's say this pivot table that I've created is for the entire data set. I need to create maybe one pivot table for every department. Let's say I have different department heads. They need to look at their own summary. Or I need to create one pivot table for each payment type, which is we have 4 types of payment. So to separate your pivot table into multiple pivot table, you must have the field in the filters, okay? However you want to separate it. And then on the pivot table analyze tab, first command, there's an options drop down. We have show report filter pages. Okay? What we are trying to do here is create multiple pivot table from one single pivot table based on a field. In this case, I need to create one pivot table for every payment type. So the field must be in the filters area. And then analyze tab, first command options drop down, show report filter pages. So they will display whatever fields you have in the filter area. So I'm going to choose payment type, click OK. If you notice on my worksheet tab below, I now have 4 worksheets, right? Each worksheet is for the various payment type. Okay? If I want to distribute, I don't have to manually copy paste and then change the filter one by one. We can separate them like this, right? Oops. Okay, the next part that we're going to look at is how do you create custom calculation field, or sometimes we call it custom metrics in your table. Okay. Like someone were asking, I think in the chat area, I want to compare between 2 months, what is the difference and so on. So let me go back to the first pivot table that we created. I'm just going to create another pivot table based on this sales data. Okay. So let's say this pivot table will be filtered based on year, right? And I need a list of all my sales rep, right? And I'm going to add in their sales amount. Let's say we want to calculate their commission, which is, let's make it simple. It's going to be 15% of the sales amount. So I do not have that field in my source data, right? The source data doesn't have that column, right? But I don't have to create it over there, right? We can directly do the calculation in the pivot table. So again, select any cell within your pivot table. Choose calculated field, right? Now, creating calculated metrics in a pivot table similar to doing formulas in Excel, except that instead of using cell addresses, you'll be using the field name. So I'm simply going to call this as com, right? And then click in the formula box. You can either type out the field names directly or select them from the list here. So our formula is pretty straightforward, 15% of sales. I simply select sales, insert field, multiply by 1.15. A name for the calculation, a formula, any column, you have to refer to the field name. Basic operation applies, plus, minus, multiply, divide, and so on. After that, click Add. And click OK. So the field will be automatically added to your pivot table, right? Okay. So that's a part on grouping, right, by dates or numerical ranges for frequency analysis, filtering to view specific part of your data, or to separate your pivot table into multiple pivot table using the report page filter, and adding custom metrics using the calculated field. All right. So this tip is simply explaining about the filter used. Right? You can use the filter field or use the report pages filter to do so. Changing the header, yes. If you want to change the header, simply click and type over it. You want to make the name more meaningful, right? Okay. Simply click and type over it. Yep. If you recall the cards here, right? Then just click and type to rename the field, right? Okay. Now for the next part, we're going to be looking at how do we create dynamic dashboard, right? That means right now, when someone wants to use specific data, of course, they've used whatever filters we have provided, right? So if you want to make it a bit more interactive, more visual, we can make use of features called slices and timeline, right? Okay, let's say I use this. I'm going to bring this down a little bit. Okay. So let's say for the payment type, right? Instead of making use of this filter, I want to set up buttons that the user can click on in order to view the report. Okay, so we're going to use the feature called slicer first. Select any part of your pivot table. Under the Analyze tab, we choose Insert Slicer. Okay, so you can choose which field you want to use for your slicer. The field doesn't have to be in the pivot table. Right? So I'm going to select payment type, click OK. This is what we get by default. You can move and resize them. How do they work? Simply click the buttons in the slicer. It says I'm clicking. You notice the pivot table filtering. And of course, because there's a field there, you can see the changes immediately now. If I want to be able to choose more than one field, we can use Control click, right, to select and deselect. Otherwise, you can also turn on this option here at the top right of the slicer called multi-select, which means you don't have to use Control. You simply click to select, click again to deselect, right? And this icon with the filter with the cross is for you to clear the selection, show all the records again. Right? Yes, you can create a chart based on your pivot table. You can, and your pivot table is connected to your source data. I'll explain that refresh part shortly. Yeah? Okay. Let me put this pivot, this slicer one side. Okay. I'm going to add another slicer. Okay. So analyze. Insert slicer. I say I choose department. Okay. And I'm going to remove the filter field. So just drag it out. All right. Now you notice the slices are always in a vertical layout. So, sometimes you find them, they are too long, taking up too much of space. Or when you're doing dashboard, sometimes the aesthetic, the placement matters. You can create horizontal slicers. When you select the slicer on the slicer tab, Okay, we have slicer style, just like pivot table style. There's some ready-made formatting that you can apply, right? And we have this feature called columns, which you can increase or decrease to make them into multi-column. For example, I go for 3-column, then I can have my slicer looking like this. Of course, you have to adjust the width and height. Right. Let's say for my payment type, I decide I want it to be 1 row. Since there are 4 items there, to increase the column to 4. Then you do the necessary formatting now. Right. When we are doing dashboard, we normally have to think of the design. Where would you put your filtering, where the pivot tables are going to appear, and so on. So whenever someone uses it, they will just select accordingly. Let's say I'm looking at Visa, appliances, furniture, and houseware. So this report looks like that. Right. Currently, this slicer works only for this pivot table because we selected that pivot table when we want to insert. You can connect multiple pivot tables together with one slicer. That's where a dashboard will come into action. Now I have a few pivot tables and I'm selecting the slicer. All my pivot table or relevant charts are being updated. Okay, to do that, one good tip is when you're going to have multiple pivot table, whether they are in the same worksheet or a different worksheet, doesn't matter. But it's good to assign a name to them now. Simply right-click any part of the pivot table, choose pivot table option. So you give it a name now. Okay, maybe I can call this month pivot, all right? And then the next one, same thing. You can right click, pivot table option, give it a name. This is when you have many pivot tables. It'd be easier for you to identify them later on. Right. So once you have named your pivot table, you select the slicer. All right. Under slicer tab, look for report connection. See, this is where we should be naming the pivot tables. So if there are many pivot tables in your file, you'll be able to identify them. All right. I'm going to select my pivot table. I click OK. I repeat it to the second slicer. All right. It's also available when you right click. Right click, report connection. Okay. So let's say if I click Amex, you notice both pivot table changes. You can check from the grand total. So this is Visa. Okay. Let's say I go for Amex and Visa. Okay, for shoes. Yep, can see the synchronizing. It's called report connection. For those who asked about charts earlier on, if you have a pivot table and you would like to view a chart version of it, simply select the pivot table. Let's say I want a chart to compare the 2-year sales for every salesperson. Under pivot table, analyze, pivot chart. You have to choose an appropriate chart type now, right? Whether you want column, bar, line, so on and so forth. Let's say I go for stack column. After that, it's a matter of formatting, resizing, and so on. Right? Currently, there is no grouping of the slicer items unless we have that data available in our records, right? Manual grouping, not directly in the slicer. Yep. Now, coming to this part about how dynamic is the pivot table, right? What if my data changes and so on? Okay, if you're dealing with dynamic, that means yours is maybe like a daily report and so on, right? When you want to update your pivot table, okay, in this example, I have two pivot table and one pivot chart. So if I select any one of them, just right click any one of them and choose refresh. This will refresh all the pivot elements, whether it's a chart, a table, same worksheet, different worksheet, based on the same data source. If you recall earlier, we actually separated this pivot table into four worksheets based on the payment type. So there are four different worksheets. In the sales itself, I have two work pivot and one chart. When I do a refresh, all of them will be refreshed at one go. Okay? Okay. Now, one thing about this refreshing, when we created the pivot table, okay, if you read again, I go back to insert pivot. You see, it records this address. In this example, A3 to H28. So when we are doing refresh, only data within that range will be refreshed. If I added extra column, extra rows, those are not included. So whoever is dealing with dynamic data, new record coming in daily, hourly, and so on, before you do your pivot table, you do this. You convert your data, the regular Excel cell, into a table. Under Insert tab, you have Table, or you can use the shortcut Control T. All right. Just click OK. All right. It will come with this preset formatting now. But the advantage about table is it's dynamic. Table are automatically given a name now. If you look at table design, this is called table 5. I can always change the name. But what happens when I add new rows, new column, or I delete a, the range is automatically recorded. So when we create a pivot table, instead of using A3 to H28 as the source, the pivot table will use the name of the table, which is table 5, or whatever name you assign. Subsequently, column and rows changes over here. When you refresh, all the tier table will be refreshed. Okay? So those who are dealing with past data, let's say I'm given last 5-year record to analyze. I don't expect past data to change, you see. So you wouldn't have to do this. This is more for people who have data being added regularly. Yeah? So it's good to convert it into a table before you do your pivot table. Okay? All right. Okay. Okay, so we looked at this feature, all right, of slicer, the button. I'll show you timeline. Timelines are a special slicer for date-related filtering. And we saw how we can link our pivot table together to the slicer using report connection. All right. So I don't have to worry about putting up multiple filters, right, for every single table. The charts also, when you filter the table, chart is linked to the chart will update also. Right? Okay, if let's say you have already created the pivot table, and then you decide to make your source data into a table, you must update the source. You go to where the pivot table is, right? On your Analyze tab, look at Change Data Source. You just type in the name of the table. Okay. Normally, they will automatically select the name appears there. You can just click OK. Right? For those who have already created pivot table, and then they have changed the source data to a table formatting, Under Analyze tab, change data source. Okay, that's a precaution to double check now. Okay, now let's look at the timeline feature. Maybe I will use the cards worksheet for this. Okay, so I'm going to select one of my pivot table under Analyze tab, insert timeline. Sorry. Timeline will only select date or time values in your source data. So in this case, we only have one column. Let's select date. Okay. There. Again, depending on your data, you might see month or year breakdown. This down a bit. Okay. So you can choose the type of frequency that you want from here. If you want a daily, right, month or quarter, all these depend on the range of data that you have, right? So how does this work? Let's say I want to look at September data. I will simply click September. If I want to extend from September to October, just go to the end of that timeline capsule and drag. Right. Whatever you are selecting, the label will update, okay, at the top left-hand corner. Sorry here. And the top right is, of course, to clear the filter. The only thing is, in timeline, we cannot do a non-continuous selection. I cannot say I want to see August and then November. There is no control click, right? It has to be continuous. Timeline can also be shared among multiple pivot table. Same step. Just right click, report connection. Right? Okay, if you don't want the pivot table to be dynamic, you have to copy and paste the pivot table, but paste it as values, right? From the source, copy and then paste as values. Some might even paste as pictures if they want to like put it in the PowerPoint slide or something like that. If you have pivot tables like that, multiple pivot table, and you need to connect them together, you have to look into what we call data modeling. We have to match common fields between them now, right? Let's see. Okay, so that is pivot table in a nutshell. A very quick review. We start with a clean data set, right? You look at how you want to group the field, drop them into your rows and column. How you want to calculate, you drop them into your values. It's always a good tip to convert your source data into a table before doing this, so that if you have new data coming in, your refresh will automatically include them. All right. Whatever data you add to values, the calculation can be changed by simply right-clicking, summarize values by. All right. Some quick formatting, use the Design tab, Pivot Table Style, or you can use your regular formatting icon. You can highlight critical data, top bottom values using conditional formatting, right? The labels, instead of leaving as row label, column label, can simply click and type over it, right? If you want to generate multiple pivot table from one, then make use of the report filter pages. You must add the field into the filter area. Under pivot table analyze, pivot table options drop down, show report filter pages, right? If I want to extract any underlying data, let's say I need all my October transaction, right? Simply double click the value. In this case, it doesn't matter whether I double click the amount or the number of transaction, okay? Then all the relevant values is extracted. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our next section, which is Power Query. Now, one of the problems that many people face when using pivot table, they simply cannot get the summary that they want. And no, most of the time the culprit is what we call dirty data, right? Sometimes cleaning up data can take like 50% of our time, but this ensures that our report will be more meaningful and falls into place nicely, right? But doing it manually, okay, it can be done in Excel. There are some tools that can help us to do it. But in Power Query, right, we have a lot of built-in tools that can help us to clean up the messy data. And we also have tools that can combine data set together, right? If I have, let's say, someone submitting to me a weekly or a daily report. So every time I have to open their file, copy the record, paste into mine, and then update. I don't want to do this. I want to automate. I just drop the file into one location, then my report refreshes. So all this can be done in Power Query now. It's a built-in tool within Excel. Right. So first, we will look at how to go about doing this. In the Excel, whenever you use the command get and transform data under the data tab, queries can be automatically accessed. You can use any source, whether it's another Excel file, text file, database, from websites, and so on. Some of the common things that we can do deal with duplicate blank cell. If my data, I need to split them or combine them together, date value not properly recognized, change the data type, deal with errors, and so on. Okay? And this task can be automated. Every time new data come in, I don't have to repeat, right? Let me go to Excel. Okay. Your pivot table is formatted. You want to refresh using next data. Yes, you don't have to, as long as, let's say, the data is added to the source, right? Let's say you put some kind of filter on your pivot table to show that particular day data. So you just change the value from the filter, okay? SQL is part of the query because in Power Query, you can also search for records, specify criteria, but you don't have to know SQL, right? It's all written for us on the back. But we're going to look at, in Power Query, there are many parts. We're going to look at mostly the part on where you can do some cleanup for us. Okay, over here, this sample data that you're looking at is data imported from a website. It's called exchange-rates.com, right? It shows the exchange rate between major countries of the world against US dollar. Now, But you can see that you have a blank row over here. The header is not recognized as a header. I also have a duplicate of the header because on the website there was like a banner advertisement in between them. All right. So let's say we look at how do we clean this up, right? You notice I have this query tab. How did this appear? Whenever we go to data, you use any of the commands here under the get and transform. Whether your data is coming from a file, from a database, from a website, okay? You will automatically have that query tab now. So when we go to query, I can click the button edit. That will open up the Power Query editor. For imported data, if it's manual copy and paste, you will not have this feature. Right? So you should end up at okay, I hope you all can see my Power Query screen. Okay. So these are all, if you look at the home tab, these are all the built-in command that I can use to clean up my data. Yeah. Okay, it's almost the same. Power Query in Excel and Power Query in Power BI. But the one in Power BI has more features. Okay, I would say it's about 90% the same. There's a little bit more features when it comes to data modeling in Power BI now. Okay? So first of all, let's say I wish to remove some columns. I got this blank column, right? We can simply right click the column, choose remove. And I also do not want, let's say, the last column. Normally, when you're cleaning out the data, the first thing is we remove unwanted elements first. Okay. So the blank rows, I have this command called remove rows. You see, all these are built in. Right? Sometimes when you import some data, the top part can be some header info, bottom part got some like last updated. You can remove the certain number of rows, remove blank, duplicates, and so on. So let's say I decide to remove blanks. Okay, you notice that blank is gone. And I also want to remove duplicate in case I have duplicates. Now, whatever I'm doing, on the right, we have this query setting and this area called applied step. So they will record every step that I'm doing. So if I make a mistake, I can simply remove the step. Just mouse over, click on the delete icon. So my remove duplicate, the duplicate of the heading. You can see row 1 and row 15 here. Now remove blank rows. Okay. And these steps are being recorded. So when new data comes in, they are automatically replicated. That's where the automation happened now. Right? Right. So I've removed all the unwanted column. Next, I want to correct my heading. I have this option called use first row as header. All right. And I want to rename some of them. For example, okay, these two columns shows the transaction date now. So I simply do a right click, rename. Let's say I wish to call this as previous. Exchange rate, well. And the next one, rename, I choose current. For the formatting, okay, you notice there's a small icon before each field name. That is the data type now. So let's say, for example, if I click on that icon representing it, I can toggle between any one of the data types here. Right? If you want to make the monetary value, right, or just regular decimal numbers. Right. What if I want to round my values? Maybe instead of having so many decimal, I would like to round my previous and current into 2 decimal places. So I'm going to select the 2 columns, shift click. Under the transform tab, there are more commands over here. And we have this group of number column. I have a command called rounding, okay? You know, in Excel, we can increase, decrease decimal, right? But this one allows you to round the values up or down or do a regular rounding. So I'm going to go for regular round, right? And I specify I want 2 decimal. So once all the necessary transformation is done, right? Our data cleaning is done. Under Home tab, we simply click Close and Load. Okay, and the status bar is running the query. Let me see whether you can see my screen. Right. Yeah, cleaned up data. So let's say this data is currently up to today. So when I come back on Monday, all I have to do is just refresh now. So it will go to that website, import the data in again, and then it will do all the things that I did in my applied step. Okay. Yes, when you can undo steps in between. You can just mouse over, but that may affect the later steps. Some steps may interrupt your next steps. Right? Okay. Now I'm going to show you how we take data from different sources and combine them into one. Okay. Let me show you something. Okay. I have a folder here called sales rep. Inside the folder, there are 3 files. The sales record for different salesperson. So I need to create one table that will combine the 3 of them together without me having to manually do data consolidate. I don't want to do copy and paste and all that. No. Okay. All right. So in Excel, under data, I choose get data. Under from file, we simply choose from folder. And then we select the location or where the files are. Just select the folder containing the file. So you will detect all the files inside. If you want to do some cleanup, like what we did earlier, there are some columns that you want to adjust and so on. At the bottom here, you can choose combine and transform data. So it will open up the Power Query editor. You can make the necessary changes. Let me select that. Okay, so I have to select a sample. By default, they will select the first file in the list. Okay, so I select the sample. This is sample data. I click OK. In case the worksheet contains, sorry, the file contains multiple worksheets, you have to choose accordingly. There. So in Power Query, you will now see this. See, I have one additional column here, right, which shows from which file the data is coming from. Okay. So just like previous, I can go through my column. I can do the necessary cleanup that I want, right? Let's say my last two column, I want them to be monetary value. That means with the dollar sign and two decimal place by default. Right? There. Refresh. Yes, if your CSV file is set to refresh, yes, the Power Query will automatically. I'm going to click close and load. Then the data will be back to my Excel. I can then, of course, do my necessary pivot table or pivot charts. Okay. The good thing about this is, what if right now in my folder, I had 3 files. Okay, let me share with the folder. You can see in Excel, I have Alan, Stephen, and Walter. Okay. So there are 3 folders. I'm going to add one more inside. So this salesperson called David. I just drag this and drop into my folder. Okay. And all I have to do is now refresh. You will notice that David's record is now included. Same thing, if I remove something from my folder, all right, then I just refresh to see this. Right? Yes, correct. The column name, for this to work successfully, the field names, all right, must be consistent among the different tables. If they are not, right, let's say the field names are not the same, then that's where we have to go into what we call data model. You have to set relationship between the table now, okay? But that's like another topic for another day, data modeling. But for now, is the field names are in the same sequence. Same sequence, same spelling, right? Okay, so that's the part on your Power Query to clean up your data. So you would typically, get your data. Okay, like I said earlier, get your data. If your data is imported from another source, then you can use the query tab, go to edit, do the cleanup there. Okay. Remember, the query can come from text file, website, or another Excel file also. And then the moment you choose load, they are automatically converted to a table. So I don't need to do the extra step of converting my source to a table. Then you do your so-called pivot table or pivot chart, link them up with your slices and so on. Right? All right. So this is the part on the Power Query which allows you to merge the data sets together. But the important thing is must have consistent field names. Okay. The import from file. And we were talking about refresh, right? All the data cleaning transformation in place, just right click refresh, right? Let's say for those who want to do a bit of an automatic refresh, you can try this. Right? When you right click your source data and you choose, okay, let's see. Let's say I go to one of my pivot table. Okay. Under right click, under okay, pivot table options. Okay. You can select this option under data tab. I repeat, right click, pivot table options under data tab. I have an option called refresh data. So every time when I open the file, right, the tables will be refreshed. But depending on the size, if let's say your data set is very big and you have many pivot table, you might experience a little bit of delay when you're opening the file. All right. So that you don't have to like open your file, right click, refresh. Okay. For those imported data, okay. Okay, for those imported data, under the query tab, under properties, okay, we can also set the refresh when opening the file. Okay. There's also every certain minutes. This one really depends. If you're in a very dynamic environment, your data changes every minute, every 10 minutes, you can do this. All right, refresh every certain time. When we are doing the linking, they will actually recognize based on the column names. Let's say, for example, it's called a worksheet 1, then another file worksheet 2, and so on. There's only one worksheet, they will just use that worksheet. But if there are many worksheets, then you will have issues. Okay. Michelle, if you want to do something like that, again, I would have to do something called data model to create the master table and link maybe the recipe names or recipe IDs together. Or we can write something like lookup formulas to link them together, right? Okay. So with that said, I hope today's session, right, has given you some good insights on what pivot table and Power Query can do for us. There are many more to this. What we have looked at, the main features are on the surface. But most important for your table, your reporting to happen, you must start with clean data. All right. And then make sure you get your steps, what you want to do exactly when you are doing the cleanup. All right. And then, of course, there are a lot of built-in help in Excel. When you go to Excel help, you can search under transform data. Maybe you want to learn about delete blank rows. Right? There will be online help also. Okay. These are some tips when you are setting up your data, right? Of course, the data must be in columns and rows, right? The header should be right at the top. Every column must have a unique field name. No blank rows, no blank column between the data. Another frequent problem that we tend to see is people like to merge fields together, but in a data set, you cannot have merged cells. Every data must be in individual cells. Okay, so if you apply some of this, then your reporting will fall into place nicely. Okay, so if anyone has any question, feel free to share. And then after that, I will hand over to Shazwan from NLB. So one, sorry. Yes, Michelle, you can use VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP now to merge the data together.
Okay, thank you, Sandra, for presenting. I hope today's uh, program has been quite insightful as you learn about pivot tables and also Power Query. So I hope that helps in your profession. So before we end off the session, I'll be presenting some library resources that I recommend, right? So if you have not yet downloaded, we do recommend that you download the NLB mobile app, which offers ebooks, e-magazines, and also what you're attending right now, NLB programs from seniors, adult, kids to early research, so early students as well. All right. And also, let me paste some of the links in the chat. Yes, I'll be presenting each one of the links. So in this slide, it's to share about the Knowledge Digital Team NLB resources. So if you're interested, you can scan this QR code over here, or you can simply just copy over the link in the link tree here and then paste it over on your web browser. All right. Just 5 more seconds, or I'll just turn over the next one. And also, we do have some recommendations for our site, which is NLB Business Library Highlights. So you may scan this QR code here, or you can also simply click on the link in the chat box. Okay, see, these are some of the links, these are some of the books that we recommend that's related to today's topic or program. All right. And of course, everybody is interested in programs. So we do have upcoming digital programs similar to this one. So if you are interested, you can just scan this QR code here, or again, you can just copy over and paste in the web browser. So I already pasted in the chat box lah. So I will show you how to subscribe for the programs. So these are catered towards any professions here. All right. Hold on. Give it like about 5 more seconds, and I'll turn over to the next slide. Okay. So for previous slide, which is on upcoming digital programs. So if you want to register, once you scan, you will just browse through any programs that you see that's interested, and then click on it, but do not click submit yet, because a link will be provided. So once done, you click on that link, and then afterwards, you just click on find out more. So once on find out more, that's where you register for the form SG. And once you register, you should receive an email that says that you are confirmed registered for the program. All right. So just take note on this. And we do have at upcoming this month's anniversary and the joy of reading, which is Read 30 in collaboration with NLB 30 years. So Read 30 is a special edition of a festival celebrating the joy of reading. So immerse yourself in the world's reading multi-sensory journey where books come to life through 5 senses at Plaza of the National Library building, which is located in Bugis. All right. So you can explore curated books recommendation from 30 Singaporean personalities at pop-up stretching from National Library all the way to Orchard Road. So you can just join us here and also scan the chat box, the link that provided, right? And also we do have this thing called Read 30. So Read 30 is NLB's signature book donation drive that aims to encourage reading and also share the joy of reading with the less privileged. So our beneficiaries are community organizations that run reading programs to help children with intellectual disabilities or lower privileged backgrounds. So throughout the month of July, the more reading hours are submitted, the more books will be donated to our beneficiaries. So in July, for every 10 people that read for 15 minutes, one book or equivalent will be donated to our beneficiaries. So if you want to find out more, you can simply scan this QR code or just again click in the chat box, the link that I pasted. Okay. And program highlights. So we do have an upcoming program that you may be interested, which is called Build a Website Without Coding, My Digital Life. So this will be on Friday, 22nd August 2025, same timing as today, 6:30 to 8 p.m. So again, it's online via Zoom. So once you have registered, you will receive a link. So do keep a lookout for it. All right. And also, if you want to keep in touch with us, you can just join in this link here. I've already pasted in the chat box as well. So you can just simply click on it. This I already pasted again in the chat box. And last but not least, this is our QR code here. This is provided by us training. So we appreciate if you can just scan this QR code here and just tell us how to improve programs or what we'd like to find out more, or you would like to give compliments, feedbacks, just scan the QR code. All right. So I'll put this up for about a minute or so. Okay, so if you're interested to, there were questions regarding the slides. So as Amanda provided here, the slides can be found on the link that she provided. All right, so you can just click on that slide if you want to download a copy of it for today's program. All right, so I hope uh, everybody was able to download a copy of it. And also, I think it was mentioned by Amanda that a copy of the recording session will also be provided, but you do have to keep a lookout for it, because it will take some time for the video to be uploaded on their site. All right, so if you have scanned the QR code and then leave us a feedback, we thank you for today's session. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you have an amazing evening ahead. All right, thank you. Oh, practice Excel file. I believe this will be provided as well on the website. Okay, I hope everybody had a great evening. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Thank you.